We're diving into something today that might make you a little uneasy. Arson. With all the recent arrests in LA, after those terrible fires, it's hard not to wonder what drives someone to do something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's a timely question and a surprisingly complicated one. The the motivations behind arson are a lot more diverse than most people realize.
Yeah.
In fact, the first thing we need to understand is there's no such thing as a typical arsonist.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're saying anyone could be an arsonist. That's a little unsettling, to be
It's
honest.
not about it's not about labeling anyone, but
Right.
recognizing that
Yeah.
the factors that lead to arson are varied and complex. You might be surprised to learn that. While certain psychological characteristics are common among arsonists,
Yeah.
things like difficulty communicating, impulsivity, a fascination with fire, their motives can be wildly different.
So it's not as simple as just saying all arsonists are pyromaniacs.
Exactly. Let's take financial gain, for example. Think about someone who torches their car for the insurance money, or a business owner trying to destroy evidence of illegal activity. Their motives are pretty straightforward: profit and self-preservation. These are often calculated acts, planned in advance.
That makes sense. It's almost like a
Yeah.
like a twisted business decision for them. But what about those cases during the LA fires where it seemed more about causing chaos?
Yeah, those cases. Those cases highlight another category of arsonists, those driven by a desire for destruction and a fascination with the power of fire. The CNN article we're looking at mentions a woman who was arrested and openly admitted she simply enjoyed watching things burn. For some individuals, witnessing fire or the emergency response it triggers can be a form of stimulation.
It's disturbing to think that someone could derive pleasure from such destruction. But the article also went into some other, perhaps loved obvious, motivations for arson, particularly in urban areas.
Yeah.
It talked about the link between arson and homelessness.
Right? That's a crucial aspect of this discussion, especially when we're talking about fires in cities. While many fires are started accidentally by people experiencing homelessness who are trying to cook or stay warm, there's a growing number of cases where arson is linked to mental health issues and substance abuse, often exacerbated by the challenges of living on the streets.
The article mentioned a particularly jarring case of a meth user who believed people were living underground and set fires to smoke them out. It makes you realize that sometimes arson isn't just a criminal act. It's a symptom of a much larger societal problem.
It's a tragic illustration of how untreated mental health issues can manifest in dangerous ways, particularly when coupled with substance abuse and lack of stable housing. And while these types of fires might grab fewer headlines than the massive wildland fires we've seen recently, the human toll is significant.
This brings us to wildland arson, which has obviously been in the news a lot lately. These are the cases that spark widespread fear, intentionally setting fires that can rage across vast landscapes. What can you tell us about the motives behind these types of arson?
While wildland arsonists are statistically rare, their potential for destruction is immense. One expert in the CNN article likened their power to an atomic bomb, and unlike some of the other arson motives we've discussed, these acts are often premeditated and carefully planned. They'll take steps to cover their tracks, turning off cell phones, using time-delayed incendiary devices.
Time-delayed devices. Can you elaborate on that for our listener? It sounds incredibly calculated and sinister.
Absolutely. Imagine a simple device, often cobbled together from everyday materials, set to ignite a fire hours after the arsonist has left the scene. They're designed to create an alibi and make it extremely difficult for investigators to trace the fire back to the perpetrator. It's a chilling reminder of the lengths these individuals will go to.
And then there's the phenomenon of firefighter arson, which seems paradoxical on the surface. Why would someone who dedicates their life to fighting fires turn around and set one?
Yeah, it's a question that has baffled researchers for years. And the answers are complex. The CNN article points out that roughly a third of wildland arsonists have some connection to the fire service.
That's a staggering statistic. What could possibly be the motivation for a firefighter to commit arson?
In some cases, it boils down to financial incentives, particularly for volunteer firefighters who may only get paid when they're actively battling a blaze.
So they're essentially profiting from the very destruction they're supposed to be preventing.
In a sense, yes. But the article also dives into some of the psychological factors at play, particularly among those who may be seeking the thrill and recognition that comes with being a hero. They may crave the adrenaline rush of battling a fire, the camaraderie, and the sense of purpose that comes with saving lives and property.
So it's not always about the money. It can also be about fulfilling a psychological need.
Exactly. The article profiles Robert Eason, a volunteer firefighter in California who was ultimately convicted of setting over 100 fires over 2 decades, often using those time-delayed devices to avoid detection. Investigators believe he was driven by a combination of financial motives and a desire to be seen as a hero. It's a tragic case that highlights the complexity of firefighter arson.
It is a disturbing thought. And it raises a lot of questions about how we screen and train individuals in the fire service. But there's another layer to this already complicated story that we need to consider. Climate change. How does that factor into the arson equation?
Climate change is essentially creating a tinderbox, making large-scale wildfires more frequent and intense. Higher temperatures, prolonged droughts, and drier vegetation mean that a small spark, whether intentional or accidental, can quickly erupt into a massive inferno.
So even if an arsonist doesn't intend to cause widespread devastation, the conditions are primed for it to happen.
Precisely. Think about the Park Fire in California, one of the state's largest wildfires. It was ignited by a man who carelessly tossed a cigarette out of his car window. In a world increasingly impacted by climate change, even seemingly insignificant acts can have catastrophic consequences.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you realize that fire, while a powerful and essential element, demands our utmost respect and caution. Knowing all this, how do you think we should be thinking about fire? Not just in the context of arson, but in our everyday lives?
That's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of why understanding arson is so important. It forces us to confront our own relationship with fire. Is it something we can still enjoy carelessly? Or does this knowledge add a layer of responsibility?
It certainly makes you think twice about that unattended campfire or tossing that cigarette butt out the car window.
Absolutely. And as we'll explore further, the human element in fire is undeniable. Understanding why people set fires is crucial for prevention and mitigation, especially as we face the growing threat of climate change.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface here. The psychology of arson is so complex. And the implications, especially with climate change, are pretty alarming.
Yeah, it's a field that's constantly evolving as researchers and investigators try to understand, the intricate web of motives and circumstances that lead to these acts. And as we gather more data, it becomes increasingly clear that arson isn't just a problem for law enforcement. It's a societal issue that demands a multifaceted approach.
You mentioned the impact of climate change, and it makes me wonder, are we seeing an increase in arson-related fires? Or is it just that the consequences are becoming more severe due to drier conditions?
That's a great question. While it's difficult to pinpoint a direct causal relationship between climate change and arson rates, there's no doubt that the changing climate is exacerbating the problem. The hotter temperatures, drier vegetation, and prolonged droughts create ideal conditions for wildfires to ignite and spread rapidly, whether they're sparked intentionally or accidentally.
So it's like a dangerous feedback loop. Climate change makes it easier for fires to start and spread, and those fires in turn contribute to further climate change through the release of greenhouse gases.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle that underscores the urgency of addressing both climate change and the underlying factors that contribute to arson. But going back to your earlier question, it's difficult to say definitively whether arson rates are increasing because data collection varies widely across jurisdictions, and many arson cases go unsolved or unreported.
It makes you wonder if there are any warning signs we should be aware of. Is there a way to identify someone who might be at risk of setting fires? Or are we talking about individuals who are so skilled at hiding their intentions that it's virtually impossible to detect them beforehand?
It is a tricky question, and I want to be clear that we should be cautious about labeling individuals or making assumptions based on generalizations. But research suggests that there are certain patterns and behaviors that can indicate a higher risk of fire setting. For instance, a history of fire setting behavior during childhood or adolescence is a significant red flag.
So a kid who gets caught playing with matches or setting small fires might be more likely to engage in arson as an adult.
It's not a guaranteed predictor, of course.
Yeah.
But it's a factor that should be taken seriously. Other potential indicators include a fascination with fire and firefighting equipment, a tendency towards impulsive or destructive behaviors, and difficulty expressing emotions in healthy ways.
So if someone is constantly talking about fire, collecting lighters, or showing an unusual interest in firefighting, that could be a sign to pay attention to.
So it's certainly worth noting, especially if these behaviors are coupled with other red flags, like a history of violence or aggression, substance abuse, or mental health issues. It's about connecting the dots and looking at the bigger picture, not just focusing on one isolated behavior.
It sounds like it's a delicate balance between respecting individual privacy and recognizing the need for intervention when there are clear signs of potential danger. But how do you approach a situation like that? Who do you turn to if you suspect someone might be at risk of setting fires?
That's a that's a crucial question, and it really depends on the specific circumstances. If you believe someone is in immediate danger of harming themselves or others, contacting law enforcement is essential. But in situations where the risk is less immediate, there might be other resources available, such as mental health professionals, school counselors, or social workers.
So it's about taking a measured approach and seeking guidance from professionals who are trained to assess risk and intervene appropriately.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that early intervention can be incredibly effective in preventing future fire-setting behavior, addressing underlying mental health issues, providing support and resources, and teaching healthy coping mechanisms can make a significant difference.
We've talked a lot about,
Yeah.
the individual motivations behind arson, but I'm curious about the bigger picture. What are the experts saying about how we can address this problem on a societal level, especially with the added challenge of climate change?
Well, there's a growing consensus that we need a multi-pronged approach that combines prevention, intervention,
Yeah.
and adaptation. Prevention strategies focus on reducing the risk of fires in the first place. Things like creating defensible spaces around homes, enforcing fire safety regulations, and promoting responsible land management practices.
So it's about minimizing the fuel sources and creating barriers to fire spread, essentially making it more difficult for fires to ignite and get out of control.
Exactly. But prevention alone isn't enough. We also need effective intervention strategies to address the underlying causes of arson, particularly those linked to mental health, substance abuse, and social inequities.
That brings us back to the point we made earlier about arson, often being a symptom of larger societal issues. Are we talking about increased funding for mental health services, affordable housing initiatives, programs to address substance abuse?
All of the above. It's about creating more just and equitable society, where individuals have access to the resources and support they need to thrive. Addressing poverty, homelessness, and lack of access to mental health care is crucial, not just for reducing arson rates, but for improving overall well-being in our communities.
It's a reminder that these issues are interconnected. We can't just tackle arson in isolation. We need to address the root causes. But what about adaptation? What does that look like in the context of arson and wildfire?
Adaptation strategies focus on preparing for the inevitable increase in wildfire activity due to climate change. This includes things like investing in firefighting resources, improving early warning systems, developing community evacuation plans, and building more fire-resistant structures.
It sounds like a massive undertaking. Are there any promising initiatives or programs that are already making a difference in these areas?
Absolutely. Many communities are adopting innovative approaches to wildfire mitigation and prevention. For example, some are implementing prescribed plans to reduce fuel loads and create more resilient landscapes. Others are investing in advanced technologies like drones and AI-powered sensors to detect and monitor fires in real time.
It's encouraging to hear that there are proactive steps being taken to address these challenges, but I imagine it's a constant race against time, especially with the pace of climate change accelerating.
There's no doubt that the challenges are immense, but I remain optimistic. The key is to continue investing in research, innovation, and community-based solutions. And perhaps most importantly, to foster a sense of shared responsibility.
What do you mean by shared responsibility?
We all have a role to play in preventing arson and mitigating the risks of wildfire. It's not just the job of firefighters and law enforcement, whether it's being careful with fire ourselves, educating our communities, or advocating for policies that support fire safety and climate change mitigation. We can all make a difference.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. It's made me realize that arson is far more complex than I ever imagined. It's not just about bad guys setting fires. It's about understanding the human element, the societal factors,
Yeah.
and the alarming impact of climate change.
It's about recognizing that fire, while a powerful force of nature, is also deeply intertwined with human behavior. And by understanding the motivations behind arson, we can develop more effective strategies to prevent it, protect our communities, and build a more fire-resilient future. It's amazing how much we've unpacked about arson just from was one CNN article. It really highlights the value of deep dives like this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know I'm walking away with a much deeper understanding. It's made me realize that arson isn't just about sensationalized stories of wildfire devastation. It's a reflection of human behavior, societal issues, and even our changing climate.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even seemingly isolated acts of arson can be symptoms of much larger trends. And recognizing those connections is crucial for finding effective solutions.
Thinking about everything we've discussed, I'm curious, what are some of the most promising developments in arson prevention and mitigation? Is there anything that gives you hope that we can tackle this problem effectively?
There are. There are definitely reasons to be optimistic. One area that's showing real promise is the use of technology. We're seeing advancements in early detection systems using things like satellite imagery and AI-powered sensors that can identify and alert authorities to fires in the early stages. This allows for faster response times, which can be crucial in preventing a small fire from turning into a major disaster.
So it's about leveraging technology to essentially outsmart arsonists and stay one step ahead of the flames.
In a sense, yes. But it's also about using technology to gather better data and improve our understanding of fire behavior. This allows us to develop more effective prevention strategies and make more informed decisions about resource allocation.
That makes sense. But technology alone can't solve this problem, can it? We also need to address the human element, the motivations behind arson.
Right. Precisely. Alongside these technological advancements, there's a growing emphasis on community-based approaches to arson prevention. This involves working with local communities to identify risk factors, educate residents about fire safety, and develop strategies to address underlying issues like mental health and substance abuse.
It sounds like a shift from a purely reactive approach to a more proactive and preventative one.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that arson isn't just a law enforcement issue. It's a community issue that requires a collective effort to address. And engaging community members in the solution is essential.
This deep dive has certainly been a call to action for me. What are some tangible steps our listener can take to become more involved in arson prevention and fire safety in their own community?
That's a great question. A simple first step is to educate yourself about the fire risks in your area and the steps you can take to mitigate them. Many communities have resources available online or through local fire departments that provide information on fire safety, defensible space guidelines, and evacuation planning.
So being informed is the first line of defense. What else can people do?
Another important step is to be aware of the warning signs of potential fire-setting behavior, particularly in young people. Talk to your children about the dangers of playing with fire. And if you notice concerning behaviors, don't hesitate to seek help from a mental health professional or a school counselor.
It's about being vigilant and proactive, not just for our own safety, but for the well-being of our community as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of simply talking about this issue. The more we raise awareness about arson, the more likely we are to identify those who need help and prevent tragedies before they occur.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. It's taken a topic that I thought I understood and revealed layers of complexity I never imagined.
That's the beauty of knowledge. It challenges our assumptions, expands our understanding, and empowers us to make a difference.
I think we've given our listener a lot to think about today, and hopefully a spark of motivation to become more informed and engaged in fire safety and arson prevention in their own communities.
Well said. Remember, fire demands our respect, and understanding arson is the first step toward preventing its devastating consequences.